Hello, my name is Michael Todran, and I am today's host of the Landscape Architecture Podcast. And today's guest I have.
Hey everybody, I'm Nina Chase, principal of Merritt Chase.
I'm Falon Mihalic, owner of Falon Land Studio in Houston, Texas.
Great. So this podcast started by Falon and I talking a little bit about the challenges or what it's like to have a virtual type office firm working remote. And we thought it was a very timely episode to talk about because so many of us are transitioning now into a virtual office. So we're going to talk about our cumulative experiences. And then we brought Nina Chase on board because, well, tell us about your story and your firm.
Yeah, thanks. So just as a little bit of background, and also prefacing this whole conversation that we're in a very different time right now, obviously with everybody working from home and working remotely and virtually. But Falon and I actually knew each other while working in person at Sasaki. And then over the last couple of years, I've started a firm, a landscape architecture firm with another former Sasakian, Chris Merritt. So he's the Merritt of Merritt Chase, and I'm the Chase. And we both wanted to practice in our home regions. I'm from the Pittsburgh region, that's where I am now, and he is from the Indianapolis region. And started our practices in both cities at the same time and have been kind of as a startup strategy working remotely in both locations over the last 2.5, 3 years. And working remotely using tools like Zoom on a pretty daily basis allowed us to get off the ground running with a pretty wide geographic base for some of our work. We do all of our marketing in person, and building relationships is a very important part of our firm, and our firm wouldn't be viable without that in-person relationship building in each of our respective cities. But then the operations of our office day to day happen mostly remotely. We have 2 staff who also are remote, one in St. Louis and one in Minneapolis. But our offices are in Pittsburgh and Indy, so we're able to have kind of very localized project focus and research focus in our office. But as a small firm of only 4 people, we're able to have projects across Appalachia and the Midwest, and we were able to do that pretty quickly. And remote work offered a really low barrier of entry in terms of setting up our office in order to just hit the ground running and start a firm and be operating as a landscape architecture firm from day one.
And Falon, can you tell us a little bit of the history? I mean, you're a repeat guest, which is great. You're one of our most popular episodes. And we wanted to have you back under different circumstances, but here you are talking about what's going on right now. So tell us give us a refresher about your firm.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do landscape architecture and public art. And as I was talking before we hit record, this past week with everything that's happening right now with the virus, I've been pretty sad to move my office back home. And it's really put this spotlight on helping me understand why a physical space is so important to my practice, because of the material-based work that we do and because of the prototyping work that we do for public art. But so, I think for me, when it comes to working remotely, it's always been a part of my practice because we have always put together really specific consultant, teams and teams of experts for different projects. And so, it does come second nature to me to do a lot of this remote collaboration. And what I've found over the past 2 weeks is, as much as possible, I've tried to empower other people in my network to feel more comfortable with the remote tools. Because I think everybody is shy about figuring it out, and you know, they don't want to look silly on the Zoom call, and it's all good. We're all here figuring it out together. And so that's the kind of optimism that I'm trying to carry forward now. And I'm making much more of a point to really support people and like walk them through some of the tools if they're not familiar with it, which is different from before. I think, you know, before, you know, maybe I wouldn't have pointed people to different resources just because, you know, there wasn't as big of a need. But now that there is such a need, I'm saying, hey, have you checked out this video on, you know, doing annotations in a Zoom video conference call, for example? And so I think, you know, my state of mind right now is like, we can adapt the technology for our use. And what we're pretty quickly discovering is that there are holes in the usability for designers. You know, things are a little imperfect, and as we are figuring that out, I would hope that landscape architects would be, you know, on the bleeding edge of saying this is what we need, and communicating that to some of the software developers so that we can make more powerful tools, because we've never been in an experience like this where everybody's working from home.
Well, there is holes. No, go ahead, Nina.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, well, I was thinking the same thing, that now with so many people using these tools, the limitations are going to become more obvious more quickly, and folks who have the skill sets to be able to fix those. I mean, you can start to see there's some silver lining in this situation. You can see that people could find opportunities to help fill those voids, and provide services that don't exist today. Yeah, I agree. I think that's a good outcome of all of this.
As soon as I think universities, well, usually I just try to facilitate the conversation and ask questions, but in this particular episode, I think I'm going to be a little bit more involved, because I too have gone digital prior to all of this. So what's interesting about this episode is we have 3 different levels. So I'm at like 6 months. Fallon, you're like 2.5 years.
7 years in July.
Well, 7 years, but
starting my practice,
But the remote. Sorry,
the first couple of years. No, that's okay. The first couple of years, we're all remote, working from my home.
Oh, okay.
Office. Yeah,
and then
exactly.
And then Nina starting one ground up. So I'm the new guy in this conversation. But
I still feel like the new guy.
I'm also new.
I would also preface everything. So Chris and I had a conversation before, and we were both like, "Are we the experts in this?" Like, and I think, you know, we've been doing it for a long time, and we've made it very much part of our working method. Yeah. But it's also, for us, we're constantly experimenting. There are holes in the way that this works, and, you know, ideally we have 2 brick and mortar landscape architecture practices, one in Pittsburgh, one in Indy, and that's our, you know, future growth strategy. But for now, we're working remotely because that's what we can do to, you know, as a startup firm, to get off the ground.
Yeah, for me, I left a big firm because I wanted to be on my own, and I had this whole romanticism of being a digital nomad. I really liked that idea, and I kept implementing steps, and I got a co-working space, and then I outgrew that co-working space, and then I went to another one with a dedicated desk instead of a hot desk, and that was like awesome. And I paid the first month's rent and also a first month's deposit, and 7 days in I had to ask for my deposit back, and because of the whole quarantine situation. So I was like making all these steps and moving forward, and then I had like the rug pulled out, and now I'm still, you know, a digital nomad, but at home. My desk is a cardboard box of my child's car seat that we just bought, and then I have another office in the living room for at nighttime that's like a real desk. But one thing I wanted to say, yes, there are holes in this technology, but there's also some amazing efficiencies that I've noticed as well. Like you don't have to like when you go to a traditional meeting, like first you grab a Danish and then you're like, hello. And then there's the one person who like kind of eats up the meeting a little bit, and like everyone wants to be nice, so it doesn't cut him or her off. And with like the online, it's like,
you have to have more structure. I think that's one of the things I really like about the work flow and the work process within our office is that if you don't have structure with digital work, it just fundamentally won't work. So you have to have structure. And so it forces you to put into place practices that maybe in an office as a principal, I'd get away with just kind of like roaming around, kind of randomly checking in on people and seeing how projects are going. And, you know, I've had experiences with principals who did that, who would just like show up at your desk and ask for an update. And like, you'd be like, oh shit. But, you know, and I've had opposite where principals would like schedule times to check in and things like that. And I always appreciated I'm a more structured person. So for me, this way of working works really well because in our office every week, we have a weekly virtual staffing meeting on Monday. I have a daily call with Chris as the principals. And then at the end of the week, we have a project manager meeting to kind of check in and see what happened throughout the week. And that kind of bones of a like skeleton structure then gets like padded with all sorts of text and GChat and email and stuff throughout the week as we need it. But it provides a level of consistency that it's required in order to communicate effectively, because otherwise if you didn't have that, it would just fall apart. And then within each meeting, we have the structure of who's leading the meeting and what's going to be covered. And it helps. It cuts out a lot of the extraneous stuff.
One thing that I find funny is, sorry, real quick. One thing
that's okay.
One thing that I find funny is I'm seeing people raise their hand in like the big meetings of like full adults, you know, it's like, hello.
Yep.
And then I also wanted to ask Nina real quick, have you had any employees that have started at your firm and ended at your firm and you've never met in person?
No, not at all. So I would say the way I categorize our work approach is a hybrid approach, where we have, and that's also terminology in academia, where you have like online classes that are hybrid classes where you'll be part in person, part remote. And I would say our firm right now is that, because there are things that we like to do in person more than we like to do online. So at the beginnings of projects, concept design, kind of sketching through big ideas, obviously site visits, things like that. Like those are all things that can't be done. Well, they could be done, but we prefer to do them in person and feel strongly that that's very much part of the work that we do and how we like to do that work. So we get together, we try to, Chris and I ideally see each other once a month. Sometimes, and especially right now, it's been a little bit longer. That usually relates to a project meeting that we've had coordinated. So we like to match it up with if we need to be in a certain place for a project meeting. But then we also, we all four of us have gone together for the ASLA conferences, and then we got together again for Exhibit Columbus, which is in Columbus, Indiana. It's something that Chris has been involved with. So we find kind of cultural opportunities, professional development stuff that we'd want to do anyway, making it a good excuse to kind of come together. Or we'll just come together, like everybody just comes to Pittsburgh for a week and we like jam out at my co-working space and hold up in a conference room. If we have like
did you know your employees before you hired them? Did you know them in real life?
We did, yeah. So that's a good question. And I think what's really has been amazing for us growing is that initially, so both Nick Steinkraust, who worked at Sasaki with Chris and I, and Alexandra May, who was at the Graduate School of Design with Chris, have been working with us. Alexandra's been working with us for about a year. Nick has been working with us for about a year and a half, maybe almost a little longer than that. Both started out part-time, but then quickly we had enough work so that they were full-time. But Nick had gone to school, undergrad actually, with Chris at Purdue, and then we all worked together at Sasaki. And then Alexandra and Chris had known each other in grad school, and
Interesting.
Yeah, I had less of a
I
working
ask,
relationship with her, but yeah. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I asked because, well, talking of putting things on hold, I wanted to hire 2 summer interns, and I've been on the search for a full-time landscape designer for some time. And with the quarantine and everybody working remotely, you know, in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, I wonder if I should just hire someone remotely for now. And then they potentially move to Houston later. And I just, you know, I'm not, it's kind of a weird thing because I'm not, you know, I'm a little insecure about offering that to someone who is, you know, I've had a lot of people, I've had a number of amazing applicants and some really good interviews. And, you know, I want to provide them with the exciting job that is working at Falon Land Studio. But, you know, I am insecure about, you know, offering them a remote position.
I say go for it.
As if it's not as exciting or something, you know?
I think go for it, and it will depend on the person. I think what I've found, you know, Chris and I initially, both of us are very good communicators. We are constantly in touch with each other and so that worked well just out of the gates. And then both Nick and Alexandra are just incredibly self-motivated individuals and practitioners who that's a trait you'd want in an employee to begin with anyway. But I think it also just lends itself well to remote collaboration because, you know, we talk about what we want to accomplish overall, and then everybody kind of goes off and does their parts and comes back together to review. And I think you'd want any of the traits that you'd want in someone working well remotely are traits you'd be excited to work with someone with in person as well. And
that's a really good point.
I think in this time, like, it's, you know, it's kind of nice. It's flexibility. Like, if they don't need to move right away and you can feel it out and see, you know, if it starts as part-time contract work and then moves into a full-time employment gig that is in person, it provides a level of flexibility for everyone, which is really nice. And I think for us as a startup firm, that too is really attractive, that both Nick and Alexandra were in parts of the country at the time. Alexandra was in St. Louis, and she was moving because her significant other was doing his residency and needed to be in St. Louis, and Nick needed to be in Minneapolis with his family. And it afforded them the flexibility to be in cities where there were fewer landscape architecture firms, and they were able to continue working with us where we were, where there are also fewer landscape architects in the employment pool. Not to say there aren't firms or landscape architects in any of those cities, but we were familiar with both Nick and Alexandra, and we're excited to work with them then. So I think it could work really well right now, given all the uncertainty. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, won't we be seeing more of this where people are being hired to work remotely? I mean, I don't know how things are in both of your cities, but you know, there are significant parts of the economy that are slowing down, and of course that will have an impact on our profession. You know, but I do think we'll see people getting hired for remote work, and there's a paradigm shift that's happening where that is, you know, maybe that's part of our new normal.
Oh, it is. Definitely. There's no way that we're not going to be going back from this. I think it'll become a little bit more hybrid. I think there's going to be components of this that people really like, and there's going to be really talented people that are amazing at their work, and they're going to be able to say, why not just keep me remote and I could stay here and work in my pajamas and give you the best work possible. And then there's also going to be a little bit of like, okay, well, we've pushed that as far as we can. We need to, you know, do the hybrid thing where we meet. But this just being like a temporary thing, I don't think so. I think this has changed the game. And now, and then we're just going to adapt and modify it as need be.
Yeah, I see a lot of things that people said or thought weren't possible. Like, well, it's not possible to do that. Like, that was always a default response in larger firms. Like, no, it's not possible. And now it's like, oh, well, we have to do it. Oh, it's not that bad. You know, actually, it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
There's an efficiency to it. You can like sketch on the screen back and forth. I'm at home. I have flexibility with my, you know, family structure. And clearly right now there are major structural issues that are beyond just like our firms working remotely, like everybody's kids being at home and people being out of work. So I think this, just acknowledging that this time is very different, but it will impact what happens in the future, because people are going to see it and some people are really going to like it, and some people are going to want to weave it into their lives. And I think it proves the point that, you know, a lot of people were asking for flexibility and firms would just be like, no, blanket answer. And now it's kind of proving the concept, which is nice. And Michael, you and I talked about students. We talk to students all the time. I teach at Carnegie Mellon here and there, and then you know, we're just talking to current students from different schools here now and then, and everybody's like, oh, so you guys have a remote office? Is that possible? Like, is that something that you'd be interested in hiring someone not in Pittsburgh or Indy? And you can tell from their response that there's an attraction to that type of work, which is interesting. I think, as I mentioned, long term, we want to grow out in-person offices, but I think it's something that, you know, the best talent is out there. And if they don't necessarily want to work exactly in that particular city that you just happen to be located, like we have projects all over Appalachia and the Midwest. Like, we're not just in Pittsburgh or Indy. So like, we're traveling and doing things, and you know, people are attracted to that in an interesting way. So it feels like it's trickling into just the conversation. I think because we are talking about it, people ask us about it. But it's an interesting trend I feel like we're going to just see more of.
My hope for this work from home revolution is that it actually opens up more equitable and inclusive practices. You know, people we've already said the word family and kids a number of times. And my hope is that, you know, it actually does have an effect long-term and helps change the paradigm in a helpful way. So for that, I feel really optimistic. Right?
That's a really good point, Falon. The equity that we've been looking for and talking about has been a little bit harder to incorporate than we would have liked. But this seems like a perfect opportunity for that. And equity, not just in race and class, but geographic and socioeconomic. It just kind of explodes the doors. Yeah. I think a minimum you need is a good laptop and a good Wi-Fi connection. One thing that I wanted to touch back on is that, yes, like as of now, we're talking about this as, oh, this is a convenience and it's a, you know, efficient and stuff. But one thing that we really need to consider as an industry as a whole is that a brick and mortar comes with liability insurance. It comes with overhead. It comes with printing costs. It comes with, those things add up.
Forks and knives, things that I was like, I don't really want to.
Cleaning staff.
Cleaning.
Rent, and of course the rent being subject to being increased. And so if you have a firm of, let's say, 10 or 12 people, and you're covering that overhead and you have to take the jobs in order to make that happen. And then you have another firm with just as talented of a pool, but completely streamlined. Like, that means you could come in under cost and people will. And so it might disrupt the whole bidding process as well.
It's been part of our marketing strategy, because we don't have much overhead beyond salaries and software and insurance, like general professional liability insurance. And again, you know, we aim to have brick and mortar offices, because I think both, I mean, our business, we deal in space, making space. So to only work virtually seems a little odd. But given that we build places, and I think fundamentally we want that physical space. But for us as a startup, I would rather spend my time getting really interesting work or doing in-house research than dealing with a printer person or ordering office supplies and managing the other sides of just like office operations that right now is all managed. I manage that, but it's like digitally, and it's one extra layer we don't have to deal with right now. I think it's something we will be dealing with later, but at that point, our hope, in our growth kind of projections, like we would be able to bring more people on board and build out a team to be able to support that side of our business. We kind of think about, I kind of group our, like, how to run our firm into 3 categories, where we have like the making, which is the actual project work. We like the doing of work. We have marketing, which is getting work, and then management, which is managing all the behind the scenes business stuff. And I think for right now, our management and our making are mostly digital. We build physical models, but they're more like test models, and those are all things that I think right now have a real efficiency to them within our office, and have allowed us to then spend a lot of our time marketing and getting work that's a process done in person most of the time, or digitally through responding to RFPs. But that marketing piece, the building of relationships in the cities and the places that we want to do work, that's where I'd like to spend my time. And if I can do that, that's great. And it frees me up. This process of not having all that overhead and management of a physical office space right now has been really nice, and has gotten us off the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally hear you about, all the management that is involved in having a physical space. And I feel pretty fortunate because my studio space right now is, part of a converted warehouse of creative business spaces. So I have my own space, but I have a mailbox there, and, a shared kitchen, and there's a cleaning staff, and that is like all like built into my rent. And there aren't a lot of places like that. There aren't a lot of spaces like that where, you have some shared resources. But what I'm hoping is that the work from home revolution, gives us more options for co-working spaces, because
absolutely.
I researched so many co-working spaces in Houston before deciding to do the space that I'm in right now. And, there just weren't a lot of good options in terms of flexibility, and I'm hoping that co-working space, market is going to change, and we're going to have, better things.
I think the co-working spaces are much more resolved in, like, where I live in Los Angeles, San Francisco, of course, New York.
New York, yeah.
Totally. But in one day I visited 6 different co-working spaces when I was interviewing, and all of them had all the amenities that I needed. Some of them even had a shower. But the problem with co-working spaces as a landscape architect is we need space, like when you roll out the trace and you tear it in the middle of the office. And I have like
but everyone loves it. Like, we have a co-working space, and it's like amazing. Everyone's always like, most other people in the co-working space are in like tech or
coding.
They're like, and so they all have like lots of computers and screens and stuff. And then I share a physical office space with with a friend who does creative work in the city, and the space, I have models, I have, samples and stuff. And then he has like things pinned up on the wall, and everyone's always like looking. And if we're there, they're like, what do you guys do? Like, it's like it's a good conversation starter. So that's been good. But it's, it's nice to have that space available, because it's similar now. Like, there's shared kitchen. It's a local co-working space in Pittsburgh called the Beauty Shop. And beautifully designed. Like, I feel proud to bring clients there to use the conference rooms and stuff. The aesthetic is really nice. And then, that's nice to be able to have that ability to use conference space.
Well, then it begs the question, do we need separate offices at all?
I don't know. We're going
I'd like to have
the real estate industry is going to shut this podcast down, but yeah, the commercial real estate industry.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think we need more flexible options. We need more, things at different price points that have the amenities that we need and the, spaces that we're talking about. Cause if you live in San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York City, sounds like Pittsburgh, like those cities have it, but in so many other places, I'm hoping that I'm hoping that the model changes.
One thing that was really important for me when I went out on my own was I needed to be by people. I'm a social person. I like to talk. I like to hang out. I like to have lunch with people. And I really like the co-working spaces because I made a lot of friends that weren't in my industry. So it really reduced a lot of shop talk. It's so hard when you go to lunch with a friend at a firm and not end up, it seems like even if you deliberately say, okay, no shop talk, by the end of it, you're like, okay, so it's a 1/4 inch separate, and, which is what we do, which is fine, but it's nice to be around people that aren't in my industry. But at the same time, it's also hard when you're working remotely because I can't just hand over and say, I'm not that comfortable with this plant palette. There's just something wrong. And then, Nina or Falon, you look at it and you're like, yeah, these are shade tolerant and see this. I'm like, oh, that's what it is. And then just quickly go back to my desk and fix it. So, those types of things.
So I have a couple of special, what I call mastermind friends, who we can call, text, or email with like questions, needing advice, needing feedback on kind of anything and everything related to small business, public art, public space design. I have long text conversations with a longtime friend and collaborator. We were just texting about insurance requirements for a type of project, and these are things that you can't just talk to your partner or spouse about,
one, they're like,
they're like, this drawing looks great, I don't see the problem.
It's beautiful, honey, I love the blue, it's great, it's perfect. You're like, no, this will fall and land on somebody's head, like it's not gonna work.
So I would say, like, as we are working remotely, I think we have to, in a lot of cases, bring down the competition blinders, because like Nina and I feel like this is a good example. We've talked about this before, where it's like, our firms are like, maybe similar, and maybe you would think that we're competing with each other, and no, we're not. We're doing like very different niche things in terms of the focus of our firm. And it's nice to say that and to put that out there, because it allows us to say, oh my gosh, what am I doing in this proposal? Or, I'm trying to put together this panel, and what do you think about it? So I think that in order to build a community of support for what you're talking about, Michael, like, you're building remotely the office trust and connection, that you're doing it, and you're doing it virtually somehow. I think it's so important. And to do that, we have to let go of our competitive nature as firm owners, right? And we have to, let our ego go a little bit, to say, I have no idea what this is or what this means, and to be able to ask for help and support.
Can I put an application to be part of your mastermind circle?
Yeah. But this is how this stuff starts. Like, Falon and I did a panel at ASLA this past fall with Sarah Zodi, who owns Studio Zodi in Harlem. And it was just great, like, preparing for that panel. We had all these conversations. It just became like good conversations around running businesses. And then, you know, Sarah and I, every once in a while, we talk about business stuff similarly. Like we were just talking about insurance and liability the other day. And so like, and I have other, you know, other colleagues that, most people had worked at Sasaki at some point, and now we've all like gone off into the world and are all across the country. And to be able to just check in and, you know, ask those questions kind of spontaneously, but using technology to aid that conversation. I you know, just in you saying all this, Falon, I was thinking too, and Michael, what you said about just like being able to turn around and ask somebody a question, I think that's something that Chris and I talk a lot about. Like, we can't do that. We can't just like turn around and like ask each other a question or like figure out a detail. And so we've become very nimble at just being, if we're like on the phone or and with Nick and Alexandra, or if we're texting, we'll just be like, hey, can you jump on Zoom? And we have when you have your Zoom account, you have just the like you have your meeting space. And so we all just kind of have that link somewhere on our, it's like always in my calendar, and I can just click on it and we just pop in. And so it's like a less of a formal, we have like the formal structure set up, which is why it's, and I'm a big believer in having like strong structure as a baseline, but then lots of flexibility within that. And that's been really nice, because I'll be like, hey, couldn't you get on the Zoom? Yeah, sure. Then we pop in, we like chat about something and work out some detail. And also for a while, even when we were first, we do it a little less now, but when we were first starting out, like sometimes Chris and I would just like be on a call with each other for like hours on end, but like doing other things. And so if we had a question, we just like ask each other. It was a little strange because it's like you're like in each other's ear all the time. But I've also heard of people doing that. My sister and her now husband met in Peru, and then my sister's in New York, and they did a thing where like in the evenings, because they couldn't be together for a while because he was getting his visa, they would just both have their video chats on and just like up and around, and they'd be going about their business, doing their kind of evening thing by themselves, but they both be there virtually, so they could have conversations and kind of keep it looser and less formal. So there's a way you can use these tools if you give yourself the permission to do it more loosely, that can be really kind of freeing.
Wow, what a weird world
that's a cool
we're
idea.
living in. Yeah, that's really
I know.
cool.
I mean, it's and you have to get comfortable with it. You also, I mean, I would also say, like, in terms of like protocol, and maybe this is good for your students. We were talking about your students and students in general, maybe being a little less formal on video chats. Like, there are some good rules of thumb. Like, you want to make sure you're not like you don't have your mic on or something, or accidentally share a screen that you don't want to share, or have your video on and people are just like moving around in the background, they don't realize they're being recorded or something. Like, there are things you want to be careful about, but
yeah, I think those are going to figure themselves out really quick.
Real fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. There are already all sorts of great videos right now of people who accidentally did something stupid on a Zoom.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Meeting for the first time. Yeah.
So I did want to talk a little bit about technology, about very like specific stuff. If you guys are okay with it, I'd like to start.
Yeah.
So one of the great things about being here in Los Angeles and in Santa Monica is where I had my first co-working space, was I'm right in the hub of they're calling it Silicon Beach, which is like Silicon Valley, but they're like a lot of big tech firms are moving into like the Venice and Santa Monica. So I was at the co-working space. I was around all these like pioneers of technology and coders, and I learned a lot, and I would ask a lot of them questions, or just through observation. So here's some of the things that I learned and adapted. The first thing that I did was I switched from a Mac to a PC because I really wanted the Surface Pro. And what that is, it's a full computer, but also a tablet. And one thing, the advice that I got was to make sure you max out the memory and the storage, and I didn't. And then a week later, I had to return it to Best Buy and then upgrade. So at least get like 256 gigabytes of storage, but 512 would be better. Don't get the 128 like I first got. And then the pen, I could use Bluebeam, mark up my red lines, do takeoffs, sketch. I've always been a proponent of sketching on paper and scanning it. And now with teaching and running my business and working with clients, I just don't have time to print out and scan and do all of that. I don't have the luxury. So the pen works really well with that. And which sketching software to use, I played around with a bunch of them, but if you guys, well, half the world follows Pangea Express on Instagram, and if you've seen their beautiful live recordings of them drawing, they're just in Photoshop. And so I figured I'll do my sketching in Photoshop as well, so I could share it with other people and have layers. So Photoshop, Surface Pro, it runs my CAD beautifully. It runs my Rhino great. They should actually sponsor the podcast, because I'm like an evangelist now.
You should give them.
Well, I'm thinking of buying one now. So.
Yeah. I hope I get like 7% of your purchase, but so the Surface Pro, and here's something that's weird that you wouldn't expect, but a wired mouse and not a cordless one. I have a cordless one just for simple stuff, but for real heavy lifting AutoCAD work, I use a gaming mouse. So they're like
I do
50,
the same.
Yeah, right? They're like 50, 60 bucks. Sometimes you can get them on sale for 40, but I'm telling you, it's if you're going to be really working, then a wired one. And then the last bit of technology that I wanted, or the two last things that I wanted to talk about is a USB powered external screen. So if you want to be really digital nomad, which is what I'm continually striving for, I want to be able to, in one small backpack, I want to have my Surface, I want to have an external monitor, I want to have a mouse, a pen, and then I want to have like a little table that pops out, and I could go to anywhere in the world, set up and do like a real office setup where my posture is good because it's elevated. And then the last thing that I'm going to invest in, and then the last thing that I'm going to invest in personally is a dedicated hotspot Wi-Fi, because
that's a good idea.
When you're dependent upon somebody else's or whatever, or if you just want to go to the beach or wherever you're at, lake or wherever, and go to a park, you don't have to, it won't inhibit anything. And it is an extra expense, but obviously it seems one that's like very justifiable. So those are my suggestions.
That's great.
Yeah, so I'm going to get a Surface Pro now.
Well, I've looked into them. It's definitely my next computer purchase. I have I think it's about 3 years old Dell laptop that I use. It's just not old enough to warrant buying a brand new one, but it will be the next purchase. And we've looked into them because you can just sketch right on the screen.
I love that.
We do a lot of sketching on the screen, but it's like with my mouth, which is not ideal. I think.
And if you're frugal like me, I went into Best Buy every day for probably about 2 weeks, and I was like, "Do you have an open box yet? Do you have an open box yet?" And then one day the guy was like, "Yeah, we have an open box that came in perfect condition." And I saved $280 to get
that's great.
the one that I wanted. And then the last bit of advice that I would give is absolutely 100% buy the upgraded insurance. It seems like a scam, but it's not. Like if I drop my Surface Pro and crack the screen, I bought the 3-year warranty. I don't want any problems. I don't want to go through Microsoft. I want to go right to Best Buy. Here you go. They give me another box, and I'm out the door. But the I guess the hardest part about switching to PC is that on a Mac, they have this thing called the time machine, and it automatically, it updates your whole entire computer. So if you lose your computer, like physically gets stolen, or you lose it, or it just becomes inoperable, you just get that hard drive, buy a new Mac, plug it in. It takes about an hour or two, and it'll restore the whole thing exactly to like the last backup. Talking about your preferences, it's a mirror of your whole entire thing. And if somebody is listening to this and can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think PC has that, and that's like a
you can
really
set
big
up
concern.
a backup point, but it's not as robust. It's not as robust as what you're talking about.
It's not
so
like mirror.
I
which
have
is silly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that's silly in today's age. Like, how can you not have that?
So backing up files is critical, and I have a schedule for doing it on a regular basis. So I back up everything, and maybe I'm a crazy person, but you know, if we could all just imagine losing a bunch of your digital files, digital files, you know, that's time, that's billable hours, and the client does not care, you know, if your computer got stolen or whatever. So I take file backup really seriously, and I actually back it up digitally to our Google Suite Drive. So I have, I can't remember the plan that we have, but I think we have a terabyte of data, and with the Google Business account. But then I also back up everything to a physical external hard drive that gets stored in a locked filing cabinet. So I do that every week. Both of those backups.
Do you use a server, or are you online in cloud format?
In cloud format. So in a sense, my server is on the cloud.
That's what we have too. We use Dropbox, and I think so we use Dropbox daily. We use Google Suite for Gmail and Google Docs and some stuff, but those are kind of like one-off things, and we'll like save them to project folders as we need to. One of the advantages I think of just starting a firm recently is that we never had to go from like, you know, a server in a closet with an IT department managing it and transitioning all of that to the cloud. We just out of the gate started on the cloud. We have, I think I just checked, we have 5 terabytes of space on Dropbox, and I don't have that all linked onto my computer or hard drive, obviously, but
use the selective sync.
I'm working on. I use selective sync so that the things that I'm working on, like projects, I have synced, and then if I'm, you know, as we finish a project, or if I'm not as involved as Chris might be on another project, I won't actually have that whole project folder on my computer. But you can always go onto Dropbox.com and see everything there, which is great. But it's been nice because they also have a recovery. You know, you can go back in time and grab previous versions of things if you need to, which has been really nice.
Yeah, I use Dropbox as well. I didn't. I got adopted into it from a firm that I was working at. But there's also some cons about Dropbox too. I feel like the software is really aggressive, and also like all the default settings is all the notifications on, and they don't make it like the user interface like easy. And so like I go in, and let's talk notifications. So for me, notifications drive me insane. And so I have a rule. I have on all my platforms, on my phone, on my computer, on my Slack, everything is just turned off. And it does, sometimes people are like, oh, you're not as responsive, but at the same time, my sanity, instead of like, right. And it's like, so I'm making it work, you know, but you know, I guess what I'm saying is maybe try it out if it's driving you crazy. But I think millennials, or not even millennials, the newer generation, they're comfortable with it, with like 1,000.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, what you're saying about Dropbox is why I don't love Dropbox and I don't use it. I also don't use Slack for those reasons. I know people are huge.
You don't use Slack either.
Yeah, I've been only in a couple of project cases where the architect team was using Slack. I reluctantly joined the Slack channel, but I wasn't super happy about it. And I think like in this discussion and for people listening and watching, you know, it's so important to like to do what Michael's talking about, where you understand what works for you and why, you know, and if the technology, like, you know, the technology serves us, we don't serve the technology. So like if the notifications are, you know, too much of a distraction or whatever it is, or, you know, if you don't want to be on video and, you know, the team is asking you to do a video call, you know, whatever it might be, it's perfectly okay to, you know, structure the technology so that it's working the way that you need for it to, you know, and you get to choose like how you do your backups. You get to choose how you set up, you know, what Nina's talking about in terms of your file structure and all of that. Because I think the promise of technology is that it gives us more autonomy, right? And hopefully more control. And so, you know, I think you should explore, I'm just using the general you,
Yeah.
you know, people should explore like, you know, what it is that they need, you know, and I found out pretty quickly that I didn't need Slack and I'm like never downloading it again. And that's, you know, okay. I think it's important to craft your technology tools the way that you would craft a physical office space with tables and with a certain kind of printer and whatever, you know. And there's quite a bit out there that we can play with and experiment with and, you know, make it our own so that it does work for us and that we're not spending so much time, you know, batting away the notifications or, you know, clunky software.
Yeah. Let's talk about Venmo, PayPal, Zelle, and how that has changed the game. How do you guys see, are you guys utilizing those technologies for deposits and payments, or I guess depending on what scale?
Yeah, we are not, but I did just have a conversation like 2 weeks ago when all the COVID stuff was heating up with my bank about how much I could deposit mobily, and needing to increase my limit, because I actually, there was like this nice process of we'd get a physical check in the mail, I'd walk down the street, our bank is like right down the street, and it was like, oh, a nice excuse to get outside, I'd deposit my checks, I'd go home. But now I don't really want to be doing that. So we had to increase our mobile deposit amount. We also accept deposits digitally, but it's through our bank. We have a PayPal account to pay for certain things online if we need to, but generally we're not using Venmo or PayPal. I use it in my personal life, but not for work related stuff.
Yeah, so I have QuickBooks, and clients can pay online through online payments with QuickBooks or mail a check.
Yeah, let's talk about.
Yeah, that's the same. We use the same.
Let's talk about accounting. Both of you guys use QuickBooks?
I love QuickBooks.
Okay.
Life changer, game changer.
Someone asked who they needed to contact in our accounting department, and I was like, ha ha ha, that would be me.
Oh, and what about the secretary? Oh, yep, that's me. And what about the?
Yep, yeah, the graphic design team. Yep. Yeah, lots of that. But yeah, I love QuickBooks. It's great.
Yeah.
It gives us everything we need. Our accountant has access to it. So for tax purposes, they can just link right in.
Yeah.
We don't send our invoices through QuickBooks. I've found it's a little clunky. We use another software that was recommended by another small business owner, Rebecca Bradley of Caden from Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
Great, yeah.
She uses, she's on an LAF
I saw
webinar tomorrow about practice right now. We met through the LAF. We were both on the LAF board for a while, and she recommended, we had a little, every time we had the LAF meetings through the year, we'd get together as a small group with a couple other smaller business owners and chat kind of in a similar way that you were talking about just like work. And we all shared what resources we were using. And she uses a software called Harvest for time tracking and also for invoicing. And we use that as well. It's really nice for tracking time and project budgets. And then we can send, they're really clean invoices. I think QuickBooks for me is like, they have some clean versions of invoices, but they still just bothered me from a graphic standpoint.
I know I've had to customize the invoicing process quite a bit in QuickBooks, but I finally have something that I'm happy with. So yeah,
that's good.
I use one called FreshBooks. I think my scales, I think, I take on varying size projects, and sometimes my projects are even, $500 or $1,000. And then they go, significantly up from there. But I use FreshBooks, and it's really nice and easy. And about a month or two ago, my wife and I did like a self-internal audit of like, okay, what don't we need? Like, we have Netflix, we have Amazon Prime, we have this, we have all these subscriptions. And then we just started editing all these things out. And one of them that we were like, well, what if we go back to invoicing via Excel? And I was like, no.
Yeah.
I was like,
it's worth it. It's worth it to have all the tools. Yeah.
And so FreshBooks is really nice because you can, you could like break up the payments, and it's really user friendly. And here's another thing is I could see when they open up the email. So
I'm sorry, my face is moving around.
No, that's okay.
I have low battery.
I was gonna say.
Okay.
Yeah,
you need an electrical source.
Exactly. One of the great things about FreshBooks is I could see, it'll tell me that they opened up the email. And so like there's this level
QuickBooks
of
does
like,
that too, which I really like.
It's great. And if you do it via email, they could say, oh, I lost the email, or, like,
no, you didn't.
Yeah. And I guess another thing that I've had to learn the hard way is I've always had a job, and then I always had like, freelance work on the side or like a side hustle. And I've always been really good at it. But one thing is when I went completely independent, it's a whole different ballpark to support myself and a family as like my own complete business. And I had to learn a lot of really hard lessons. And I talked to people that have been independent as an architect for a while, and they're like, you have to go after the money owed to you. You have to be very professional, but it's kind of like the squeaky wheel gets the oil type thing. And being nice is not, I'm not saying not being nice, but I'm saying like you can't be too apprehensive. I don't know, maybe you guys could touch a little bit about that.
So in QuickBooks, I understand in QuickBooks, you can send a reminder about an invoice, and you can see that they've gotten the reminder. So for some of my projects with bigger companies, I've, have a client that's a national corporation, and they have their accounting office in California. And so the checks have to come from California, and so it's like, is the check in the mail?
Right.
And so sometimes I think it is helpful for peace of mind to just understand that some of these bigger companies have their own sort of checks and balances and processes that you have no control over, but it's helpful to have some kind of just very regular system of reminding someone about an invoice, but also just saying, in the event that that's not getting through, to just check in with whoever your contact is to say, hey, like, what's the status of this? And, where's it coming from? And can you just confirm for me that it's been, sent to the accounting folks?
Yeah. the worst thing
Yeah.
that yeah, go ahead, Nina.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the worst thing is I never want to do is I never want to like withhold work for payment, because it just feels, it just feels wrong. But I do know that so I had one client where I did a planting plan, and the planting plan was for $9,000, and we broke it up into 4 equal payments. So it was like $2,249 or something like that. And to a big, huge firm, $9,000 is not a lot of money. And I think my client was used to working with really big firms that could absorb waiting like long periods of time before getting paid. And I couldn't. I was like, like this quarter payment of this is actually very important to me.
Right.
And I was trying to trying to pretend like it didn't affect me, and I was just trying to absorb it. And then finally, I'm kind of friends with the client as well. And I texted him and I said, look, you guys hired me because I'm not a big firm, and because I'm going to give you that really individual attention. I'm going to put love and care into the project. But with that comes also, I can't absorb these long lapses in payment. And he's like, say no more, got it. And then like the next day that the check was in the office. So it's those little things I had to learn that I didn't anticipate. Like nobody ever said,
So a lot of that type of stuff is covered in very strong wording in detail in my contracts. And so it's said up front, what the expectations are. But I want to respond to something you said, Michael, about not withholding work, in terms of payment. I think it's important to have a conversation and to understand like where the client is coming from. I'll use an example. We've been working for 2 years on this playground project that's happened in all of these different phases. And, there was a point where the PTO for the school had to say, we need you to slow down because we need to like fundraise more money before we're going to get these things. And I said, no problem. Right. And so it's helpful to I would even say it's helpful to just like upfront kind of ask for feedback from the client around like, so that you understand and have a better expectation around payment schedules. Because like I was saying with the people who have the accounting department far away, they're like, yeah, we can send your invoice, but they don't process invoices until such and such amount of time. And, it could be like 6 weeks or even 2 months before you like get a physical check in your hand, And so I would say just get in front of that early, and kind of understand.
We like to, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
To that point, like we tend to ask our clients when they send out their invoices, because we do work with a lot of architecture firms that have an accounting department, and they process every 2 weeks or once a month. It's very different depending on the office. And so, we try to send the invoices out as soon as possible all the time. And knowing that certain firms have certain times of the month where things actually get processed, so we don't want to miss that billing cycle. Some architecture firms are great at telling us, like, at the beginning, they say you need to bill us before we do our checks on the 30th or 31st. You need to bill us before the 26th, and that is wonderful because they already have a system set up. But then a lot of places don't. So then we like to ask what their schedule is so that we can kind of like get into that mix. We also just assume we're not going to get payment because most of these architecture firms were doing more institutional work for that. That's who the client is, and they have a cycle of billing. And so often it's like 4 to 6 months. If we do work, like we don't see payment for that work. And those are our biggest projects. We don't see payment for that work for quite some time. We fill that in with a lot of smaller projects that we'll get paid directly for. But it's definitely something that is a challenge. I think just that like ebb and flow of cash flow, and that's a pretty typical condition for architecture and design firms, landscape architecture firms, because we don't like sell a product and get paid right away. It's like we do a service, we invoice, they invoice the client, then it, you know, the monthly billing cycle goes about, and 3 months later somebody cuts a check.
And that's always
so
why
it's
in
an
our
interesting
contract,
thing.
it's always a big amount for the, you know, what a lawyer would call a retainer, you know, what you're billing
Yeah,
again.
that was my other thing. Yep. Yeah, if you're working with people, you know, like we often will say we'll need 20 to 25% upfront, just payment, so that can be used as a retainer, and we can then bill against that later, or we just take it off the last bill. But that can help cover costs upfront.
I never touch a job without a retainer. Like, it's just silly practice.
Michael, what else did you want to touch on? I actually have to run to another Zoom meeting.
Yeah, I actually got a text from a client that's like, hey, do you have that drawing? And I'm like, oh,
no, I don't.
Yeah. So I gotta get on some some drawing. But that's our reality, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So I would say, I feel like I'm full of mom advice.
Sure, you know? Let's hear it.
I'm like, in this technical revolution.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mentioned that I started out for so many years working from home. And so I have some tips about
Let's hear it.
Protecting your mental energy, okay? And protecting your personal life, okay? I highly recommend you come up with some separations. Again, I'm using the general you to anybody who listens to the podcast. Set up separations to the best that you can. Have working hours, right? Mm-hmm. And you know, those hours can be whatever you want. If it's like after you put the, you know, kids to bed and you're working, you know, and you put in a couple of hours at night, but you're doing, you know, family time during the day, like, great. I know people who do that. So absolutely set up the boundaries for yourself. Otherwise, your work is just going to bleed into every single part of your entire life in not such a great way. Like, what boundaries do you guys, I can tell you some of the boundaries that I have set up right now. I do not work on Saturdays. I do not respond to client texts. I do not take meetings on Saturdays. If I'm in my studio, I'm like, you know, there working on a painting or something. I'm not doing client work. So I always have at least Saturday that is like that one day. And I'm enacting it now, even as I'm working from home. I will not be working on any type of, you know, work or client-based work out of my home office on a Saturday. And then the work hours thing, I stick to pretty strongly. So I try really hard not to work past 6:30, 7 p.m. When I'm working from home. I will say that, you know, there are plenty of instances where under normal conditions where I will basically work all day, come home, have dinner, take a beat, and then go back to the office for a couple of hours when I'm needing to meet a deadline or there's just, you know, so much happening and I have to put in the time. I will do that, but I'll always take some kind of break, some kind of break in between. And I've moved away from having everything go to my personal cell phone. So I have a landline at my office, which I adore and I miss it. But now that we're all working from home, people are calling my cell phone. But during non-work hours, I don't really have my cell phone near me, just as a way to kind of limit the work from encroaching on my personal life. What about you guys? Nina, do you have things set up for, you know, work-life boundaries?
Going back to my like perpetual desire for more structure in life. I have a pretty structured day. I start the day usually around the same time. Chris and I generally talk to each other at like 9:30 in the morning every day. And so I try to get some emails and stuff done before that. And then, work until like 6:30 on a normal good day. And like you said, if there's a deadline, kind of sticking to, needing to meet that deadline and getting it done, staying a little later. But I do have dedicated workspace at home where I have a desk and I can shut the door, or at the co-working space, having that dedicated space, which was important. I think, given the current context, it's harder for people to carve out that space. And I think we'll see as this progresses how people are able to do that. I don't have kids yet, so I'm not also juggling having to like teach at the same time, which a lot of my friends and colleagues are doing. But being able to have that dedicated space is really important. I think the other thing for us in terms of managing and just working together, at the end of the day, we're just people working together. And so all the same kind of, be nice and work hard kind of rules apply, whether you're virtual or not. And, some people like to put their heads down and work for 2 days straight and not get in touch. And they produce an epic work product at the end. Other people would prefer to check in more frequently and get more iterative feedback. And I think that just depends on personalities and who you're working with, and assessing and making sure and checking in with your coworkers about how everybody works to their highest potential, and figuring out what works for everybody individually, just like you would do if you were in person. And I think what's nice is that, as I said at the beginning, the virtual stuff requires you to do that, because if you didn't, nothing would get done. So it's almost like there are built-in checks and balances that have to happen, which I appreciate. I think, we're in interesting times. I'm starting to go a little crazy in my home, which I normally love to be at home all the time. Once this lifts and hopefully we get out from underneath this, it's something that, the same rules apply from working in an office as they would in remotely. I would say one positive thing about this whole thing is that everyone's using Zoom not just for meetings, and finding really creative ways to get together. We had done like a virtual happy hour here and there, but it was not like a frequent thing. And now I think there's more of an excuse to just use virtual media to get together. Like my parents, my sister, and I, and our significant others all have been having now a weekly virtual dinner, and we just put the computers up and we eat dinner together. And in your office setting, doing the same things you would do if you were together, like celebrate birthdays, or do a virtual happy hour on Friday or whenever, or do a lunch and learn, and use the same tools, but use them in a way that's more social, so that you're still building culture, which I think is hard to maintain.
I'm doing virtual coffee dates. One of the ways that I get and keep business and get collaboration and things like that going, both on the client side and for different sub-consultants and things. I invite a lot of people to my studio. That's part of my regular thing. There's always someone coming to my studio for coffee. And now I'm inviting people to virtual coffee dates through Zoom.
That's great.
Yeah, my work schedule, it's pretty insanity. One
Have you taught your kids Photoshop yet?
Well, I'm probably a certifiable workaholic, and so that's something I have to struggle with. And when I got my co-working space, I set these parameters, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna run to work, and I'm gonna exercise, and I'm gonna get to work, and I'm gonna work from 9 to 5, and then I'm gonna come home, and it just didn't work out that way. And what I realized is, even when I got there early, I would kind of just not be that productive. And it seems like right around 4 p.m. I was super focused, and I had to have a talk with myself and say, okay, this is your nature. You like to work at this time. And so I was really disappointed in that whole 9-to-5 thing couldn't work. But then, so I refigured my life and I was like, okay, if I'm honest with this and I realize that this is how I work, then make that work. And so I hung out at the house. I slept in. I hung out with the kiddo and the wife, and everything was nice. And I finally figured out the system. And then I come in at 4 or 5, and I work till like 10 or midnight. And then like people wake up and like, oh, these beautiful drawings just so happen to appear like in the morning. But then this whole, virus thing hit, and now I can't do that anymore. And so now I have to like be forced back into a different reality, and I'm struggling with making
into a virtual 9-to-5. You mean, is that what you mean? Like that you're having to work more at the time that, so-called else is working?
Well, I think, what's happening now is because everyone's just really trying to take care of their clients that they have right now. Everyone's response times are really fast and things are really fluid, and I can't be the one holding up the jobs during the day. And so I feel like those bad mafia movies were like, every time I get out they pull me back in. but yeah, I'll make it work.
These are hopefully extenuating circumstances, so I do think you'll be able to get back to it. It's just going to take time. But I think that your point that you were looking at your most productive times in the day is why remote work can be so great for so many people, because it is, again, it's flexible. It's about flexibility, and that some people, some people just work. Everybody works differently than everybody else. So like find the best way to work for yourself to make yourself happy.
Yeah. I know that you mentioned boundaries. And I'm really big on boundaries, and I've had to set some in the last couple of days. I had one client that every time this client was sending me something would write the words ASAP, and I responded and I said, stop.
That like makes my like blood pressure.
Yeah, it's like an anxiety. Like,
we all went.
And because I take it seriously. I mean, that means drop all my other clients, handle yours, and do that. And that's not the case. And if you keep using it every time, one, you're going to give me anxiety, and then two, it's not going to mean anything to me anymore with you. So that was one. And then another thing that I had to do was, so I was doing some drafting and some graphic design work and things like that. And all the red lines that I was getting felt very like accusatory, like, oh, like I mentioned this to you before, and like certain things. And I wrote this big Jerry Maguire, like 4-paragraph thing and sent it out to the whole channel in Slack and was like, look, like our job on this end isn't easy, blah, blah, blah. And, because I've been in the game for a while and I've seen so much around the world as far as landscape architecture, I'm confident that I could bring up these items. But some of the junior people reached out to me and were like, thank you, like this, like we can't say this. So it's very much, I like to protect my emotional space and personal space as well, and being like, hey, like you guys have to have empathy our way as well.
Also, right.
So,
Totally.
But that being said, I'm getting crazy texts right now saying, where's that drawing?
ASAP.
Yeah, ASAP. This one actually really is ASAP. They're actually on site waiting for it. So,
there you go. Yeah.
This one's real. But
it was really good to see your faces, Michael. Thank you for inviting me, and Nina, thank you so much for being part of our impromptu conversation around everything.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Yeah. This is great.
Okay, and then let's Falon, I always like talking to you, so let's like in a little while let's do another podcast and post post C19.
Yeah, look at how great jazz hands look on the virtual camera. That is so good.
I'm missing teeth, and you have jazz hands.
Yeah. So
I love it. Take care of yourselves, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.